Welcome to Global Signs on a beautiful spring day. I'm Bruce Han. Pr랭크에어런스, a former head of global PR for Hyundai Motor and now a principal at Bgr그룹, a leading Washington political advisory and communication firm, will share his deep knowledge and insights on Korea with our viewers. Frank, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Bruce. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Your former job was at Hyundai Motors. Tell us about your current job now at the Bgrgroup in Washington.
Sure. At Bgrgroup, we believe that we're experts on Washington. We provide political advisory and communication services to clients who want to tell their stories in the U.S., whether it's to the White House and Congress, state governments, to the media, or to online audiences anywhere through SNS. We have a large international practice. We have a number of clients that are foreign governments, foreign companies, and foreign individuals. And they rely on us to give us the latest intelligence from Washington, tell them how it affects them and what we can do to help them. We have been proud to represent several Korean firms. As a firm, and for me personally, BGR has a special affection for Korea.
Now, what is Washington's view on President-elect Yoon?
In general, Washington likes a politically conservative Korean president. That's because they are usually tougher on North Korea, which is Washington's top priority on the Korean peninsula. Also, conservative Korean presidents tend to be more cooperative with U.S. foreign policy aims in Asia. And conservative Korean presidents usually get along better with Japan, which is what Washington really wants. But frankly speaking, President-elect Yoon is a political novice. He's largely unknown in Washington. What is known about him is the unconventional start to his presidential transition, with his insistence on moving the presidential residence out of the Blue House. The fact that he was a corruption-fighting prosecutor is good, but he does not yet have a profile as a statesman. I think Washington doesn't know quite what to make of it. Washington will get to know him a lot better when he meets with President Biden after his inauguration.
Now, what will a Yoon administration mean to business and trade between the U.S. and Korea?
Well, during his summit last year with President Biden, President Moon Jae-in set in place several areas of business cooperation, from chips to pharmaceuticals. The difference now, under a conservative Korean administration, is that the Korean government's role will be to incentivize Korea's private corporations to carry out the work, rather than for the government to lead it. One area of ongoing concern for Korean companies doing business in the U.S. is what many feel is a rather opaque and sometimes inconsistent regulatory environment here in Washington regarding foreign businesses. This has to do with anti-dumping cases, tariffs, and so on. That's why foreign companies have turned to firms like BGR to help them through the jungle of Washington.
Now, Frank, are there areas of increased opportunity for Korean industry in the U.S.? What are the sectors?
Oh, absolutely, Bruce. Well, even before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there was a U.S. concern about secure global supply chains. By that, of course, I mean China. From a national security standpoint, the U.S. wants to depend less and less on China. Instead, it wants to buy from its trusted allies that can ensure delivery of cutting-edge products at good prices. This is an ideal position for a strong strategic ally such as Korea. I think the sectors that probably will be looked at the most will be biopharmaceutical, AI, green energy, and obviously semiconductors.
Now, regarding the war in Ukraine, what does it mean for Korea as viewed from Washington?
Well, Bruce, with each Russian atrocity that we learn about, this war is increasingly forcing every country on the planet to pick a side. Even if a country tries to remain neutral, that will be seen as supporting the Russian invasion and prosecution of the war. In the view of some in Washington, Korea was slow to pick a side. Korea has come to support the sanctions on Russia, but was first viewed as a fence-sitter, especially by some in prominent Washington think tanks, and especially because Japan had so quickly, forcefully, and publicly sided against the Russian invasion. The US-ROK alliance is deep, and it's strong and enduring. but I think Korea has some bridges to rebuild in Washington. That will be a top foreign policy priority for President-elect Yoon.
Now, overall, how would you say Korea is viewed in the U.S.?
Well, I think outside of Washington, and probably in lots of parts of Washington, very, very positively from a few viewpoints. Korean companies such as Samsung, LG, CJ, Hyundai, and Kia have made large, long-term investments in the U.S. that provide tens of thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions in tax revenue. That generates enormous popular and local political goodwill by their presence. Of course, Korean soft power is at an all-time high, and America is filled with BTS, Squid Game, and BBGO fans. Inside Washington, official Washington, I think Korea has some work to do in building better and more relationships with Congress, the administration, think tanks, and the media. Successive Korean administrations have not leveraged its soft power might as strongly as it could have, or been as consistent in delivering its message here in Washington.
Now, finally, Frank, can you recommend particular sectors to Korean investors, especially those that will benefit from the new administration's relationship with the U.S.?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that is so important to the Biden administration is clean energy. And for many Americans and for much of the world, that means electric vehicles. And we know that Korea is the EV battery maker to the world and has already done some joint ventures with American companies. I would say more of that in terms of green energy, also AI, and also food, processed food and animal feed. That's a big important sector to make sure that you have secure supply chains.
Frank Ahrens, principal at Bgrgroup and the first American global PR head at Hyundai Motor. Thank you so much for being on our show. It was absolutely wonderful to have you on today.
Bruce, it was a real treat. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. That does it for our show today. Thank you so much for being with us. Until we meet next week, please be safe and vigilant and healthy.